Welcome to the People of AI podcast, showcasing inspiring people with interesting stories in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm Ashley Oldacre. Let's jump right in. This podcast is sponsored by Google. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. Hi everyone, Ashley here.
Hi, I'm Gus here.
Gus, we have some really exciting guests today who are joining us. So I'll start off with reading their bios and then we'll get into their stories. So we'll start off with Stephen. Stephen Johnson is the editorial director of NotebookLM and Google Labs. He is also the best-selling author of 14 books, including Where Good Ideas Come From, Farsighted, and The Ghost Map. He was the host and co-creator of the Emmy-winning PBS BBC series How We Got to Now and Extra Life, and writes the newsletter Adjacent Possible. His TED Talks on the history of innovation have been viewed more than 10 million times, and he is a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, and Marin County, California, with his wife and 3 sons. All right, Raiza. Raiza Martin is a senior product manager in Google Labs, leading NotebookLM. As part of the founding team, she led the initial discovery, ideation, and launch of the product, including building the team. Previously, she worked on launching AI Test Kitchen in Google Labs and has worked in the payments and ads organizations in the past. Before Google, Raiza worked exclusively at startups. Welcome, Raiza. We're so happy to have you both here.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, so are we.
Nice. I'm very excited. First of all, I use NotebookLM every day. I'm a little bit shy to say that, but every day.
That's so great. We love to hear that.
Yes, I have some cool use cases. But before we go there, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit more about your story? And just to be fair, I put all documents I could find about you on NotebookLM, and it was a lot. So I would love to hear from you.
Amazing.
So it's been a really interesting journey to this product and to Google and to working with Raiza. So most of my career I spent as a writer working on largely writing books and then at various points doing podcasts and TV shows, largely about the history of ideas and innovation. But throughout that process, I was always really interested in the tools that I was using to write the books and to research the books and to kind of share ideas with my collaborators when I was working on the TV shows and so on. And so from an early age, I mean, I think this really goes back to college for me. Like when in the late 80s, I got obsessed with this program that Apple released called HyperCard. And I had this vision of like organizing all my notes for my classes using this software that never really went anywhere, but I kind of like lost a semester trying to get this software to work because I thought, if I could just do this, then I will be able to think more interesting ideas and keep track of everything in a better way. So like for some weird kind of nerdy reason, I've always had this interest in how can software help us like think more clearly or make more creative associations and so on. And so as I got older and as my kind of career developed as a writer, I developed a little bit of a kind of side hustle writing about the tools that I was using. And so I wrote a number of pieces and blog posts over the years. I started using a tool called Devon Think, and I used a wonderful writing tool called Scrivener. And I would write these little posts. Occasionally I would write for the Times Magazine and the Times Book Review, actually, about how I was using software to help me write. And then in a book I wrote called Where Good Ideas Come From, I talked about that kind of at length, which is this idea like, okay, we have certain environments that are really conducive to good thinking in the real world. Maybe there are certain software environments that are conducive to like more creative thinking, and what would those look like? And so it'd been something that was always kind of on the sidelines of what I was doing as I was working on all these projects. And then fast forward to the fall of 2020, or 2021. I went to the Times Magazine and I was like, I want to write a piece about these large language models. This is, a year before the ChatGPT moment, but GPT-3 had been released at that point. Google had Palm and Lambda, which were also very powerful models, but they weren't publicly sharing them in any way. But you could, if you really tried hard, you could get access to GPT-3, OpenAI's model. And so I wanted to write a piece about that. And so I, in October of 21, I kind of finally get access to this language model. And I just had this, I just remember sitting alone in my study for like 3 hours and thinking, everything is going to change. Like, this is such a fundamental breakthrough, the ability of these models to converse with you and to have some kind of knowledge about the world, but mostly just their mastery of language. And it seemed like that whole thing I'd been chasing for so much of my life about using tools with writing and researching, like suddenly there was a whole new set of possibilities here. And so I wrote this piece that came out in April of 2022. And it may have been the most controversial piece I've ever written in my life. Like, there were so many people who were like, oh, Johnson fell for the hype. Like, he thinks that these language models are going to be, such a big deal, but everybody knows it's just autocomplete on steroids and, it's not going to be useful at all, and how sad. And I mean, there were some people who were influenced by it in a positive way. But it was brutal. Like, the pushback online was really intense. However, there were two people at Google, Clay Bavor, who's since left, and Josh Woodward, who now they had just created Labs, Google Labs, and Josh now runs Labs. And they had been reading my books over the years, and they both read the piece. And Labs had been founded with this idea that maybe we would do these interesting co-creations with outsiders, and not just, if you were building a music product, don't just have a bunch of technologists build a music product. Like, why don't we bring in a musician, and have them in the room for the whole life of the product? So they had this idea that they would kind of, design the product development process a little differently inside of Labs. And so I think it was Josh came up with the idea of like, I wonder if we could get Steven Johnson to come, because he's obsessed with tools for thought, and maybe we could get him to come part-time, and we could use him to build some kind of language model based software tool for writing and thinking. And so Clay emailed me out of the blue, proposed this, and I said, that sounds like a really good idea. Like, I would be interested in doing that. And I just actually I showed up at Google initially part-time in late July. I think it was July 25th, 2022. And I just saw Josh just shared the email he sent me on that day. And it's like, okay, we're gonna start this Tools for Thought project, and we're gonna pretend that it's a startup. And I'm gonna get you access to the best people and the best new, interesting, related research inside of Google. And we're just going to go for it. And that was the day that I met Raiza Martin. And
wow.
We were off to the races.
That's so cool. It's always so cool hearing Steven's side of the story, especially because that article that he refers to that he wrote, this controversial piece, that was the same article that I read before I'd even met Steven that got me to join Labs. I had heard about, of course, I'd heard about AI, I'd heard about LLMs, and up until the point where I read the article, it was just sort of interesting, but I didn't think about diving deeply into it. But when I read it, I was like, okay, that's it. That's the next thing I'm doing. I'm probably going to do it for the next several decades.
Why weren't you defending me on social media?
I was about to say, where did you stand on this controversial?
I thought it was not controversial. I read it and I thought, what a great guy. I love this.
Yeah.
Good for him writing this. So,
oh, well, so we've had your wonderful story, and now Raiza, let's jump in and dive into your story.
Yeah. Wow. It's so cool getting to talk about it. I'll tell you that I think even from a very young age, I've just always loved technology. And I think about some of my favorite memories just in life in general. And there's always something there about how technology was a part of my life. And one of my earliest memories is the very first computer that I owned, my dad and I actually built together.
Oh, wow.
And the reason we were building it, actually, is because computers were super expensive. We lived in the Philippines. They were super expensive to buy out of the box, just already built. And my dad had this idea. He was like, I bet it's not that hard. Just make your own, right? We just have to figure out the things that go in it, and we'll build it ourselves. And I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Let's do it. And so,
How old were you?
I was probably 12. Yeah, I was 12, maybe a little bit younger because I remember, yeah, I think I was younger. But it was one of those really formative memories where I was like, well, my dad, who is a doctor, just had this idea about doing something that I'm pretty sure he had no idea how to do, just went out and did it. And it was so formative for me because we succeeded. We built the computer, it worked, and it was magical for me. I got to play games on that thing. One of my favorite applications was Word, just like typing. And I was like, wow, this is better than paper. This is incredible. It's better than a typewriter. And it changed my life. And I think the next product that really did that for me was, I remember for my high school graduation, I was 16, and my parents were like, well, what do you want for your graduation? And I had saved up all of this money, and I wanted to buy this thing called the iPod. And I remember the feeling and the experience of opening it. And I don't know if folks recall, but they used to come in these giant boxes where the box was huge and the iPod was small. And I was so confused. I was like, why is the box so big? but I remember the feeling of like, I would open the box and I was like, this feels different. This feels cool. Right? Like when you would like open the white box, I was like, this is crazy to me that there is somebody out there that is just thinking about how to build these things. And I remember telling my dad, I looked at the back and it said, built in like Cupertino, like the one infinite loop. I told my dad, where is this? I want to work here. My dad was like, that's super far. That's like in the States. And I was like, okay, how do we go there? Because I want to do this. And it wasn't actually that much longer after that we moved to the United States. We came here, and I was like, okay, Dad, is it now? Can I do it now? He was like, oh, I think you probably have to study. But yeah, he's like, sure, it's now. So one of the first things I did is I actually wrote to Apple. And I wrote them I can't remember where I got this email, but I wrote to them and I was like, hey, been a big fan forever. Can I get a job? And somebody wrote back to me and said, yeah, sure. Like, you could totally get a job, but it's like, what's your background? Like, what are your skills? And I told them, I was young, I was just a kid. They were like, okay, so it sounds like you could probably work in one of our stores. So I went to this thing and I was like, no, this is not it. And I was like, I don't want to sell stuff. They were like, well, what is it that you're interested in doing? And I told them I really love technology. And they were like, okay, well, maybe you can repair computers. I was like, for sure, that's what I want to do. And so one of my earliest jobs was actually repairing computers at an Apple store. And, fast forward many years later, I went from that to startups to then Google. And it was at Google that I realized, I was like, wow, I really love this. I really love building fun, cool, useful things for people. And that's how I ended up in labs. Is I was like, this is an opportunity for me to build something totally new using totally new technology, and we'll probably discover like the actual utilities of this thing as we go. And I remember when I joined, Josh actually kind of similarly, we had this chat about like what the future of labs was, and Josh's mandate to me was like, build a business, build a new thing. And that was it. He didn't tell me what product to build. He didn't tell me how to build it. It was just the best blank check I've ever gotten in my life.
Wow.
And the AI test kitchen stuff there is important too.
Oh,
like,
yes.
You were
Yes.
involved in that because that was really the first point that Google was exposing any of the AI directly.
That's right. So when I first joined Labs, I joined to launch AI Test Kitchen, which was the first AI experience that Google had launched. And it was such a different time back then that I've almost forgotten about it. But this was only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember, aside from build a business, he was like, and launch this. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we were
Wow.
doing both.
So your introduction, Stephen, to AI was through testing Palm and Lambda first and having access to those models. Where was you were brought in to build AI Test Kitchen, but what was your entry into AI? Did you have an entry into AI before that?
Oh, my goodness. So before AI, I actually worked in payments. And before payments, I worked in ads. And before ads, startups. But I had no AI background whatsoever. It was just literally Stephen's article that I used as a map of sorts. I was like, okay, this is what he said the thing is. Now I'm going to go Google and learn as much as I can about this before I even start in the role. And
So he was your introduction.
he was 100%.
What a terrible guy. Ridiculous, starry-eyed optimist.
It's really funny because people are like, wow, you really knew like AI was gonna blow up before. And I was like, no, like don't give me that much credit.
He knew it.
He knew it. And then I was like, yes, I agree. Let's go. And what's funny about this is then I joined labs and I got access to all of the models and I got to experience firsthand what Stephen was talking about. And I had this sort of thought in my head of like, the same thing. It's going to change the world, but how does Google bring it to the world?
Yeah.
What is our sort of first entry here?
I think there's a really important thing that happened for both of us right around that point where there was basically a classic like 20% time project for Google that had started, I think, in June of 2022, so a month or two before Raiza and I met and I arrived. And it was really kind of put together by these two people, really. It was Dale and Adam. And Adam Bignell then subsequently became a kind of founding engineer for what became NotebookLM. But it was this terribly named project, but it was very visionary. It was named Talk to a Small Corpus. and by corpus, it was not talk to a small corpse. It was talk to a small corpus. And by corpus, it meant talk to a small body of text. And the idea, which really, in a way, is like the seedling of everything that NotebookLM became, was that what if instead of having a conversation with a general purpose language model, the way people were doing with ChatGPT, the way people were doing at Palm and Lambda inside of Google, what if you actually gave that model some set of documents and said, please answer the questions I ask you based on these documents, or use these documents as the ground truth for your answers. And there was interest in that because it seemed, one, that would reduce hallucinations. Two, it would allow you to personalize the experience, right? You could give it the information you were working on, or your book that you were writing, or your research notes, or all the things that I was interested in. And so they had begun doing this. It was very hard to do it, in part because the context window of the model was so small, so you couldn't really put that much information in there. But Adam had built up this early prototype of it just in Colab. And what's part of this story, we can get into this, is both Adam and Dale were also writers on the side. They both were kind of novelists, actually fiction writers. And so there was from the very beginning this kind of interesting humanities, like literary side to the team that was going to ultimately assemble NotebookLM. And I saw this, and Raiza and I both saw this, and we were like, oh, this is interesting, this is cool. And so Adam and I got together and we put a little bit of my book Wonderland, which had come out I don't know why we even chose Wonderland, it was kind of random, but we put some passages from that book into this collab. And at some point, in like the middle of August of 2022, I remember asking questions of an AI, and it would answer and say, the answer is this, and here are the passages from the book that are relevant to that answer. And I was like, okay, no computer in the world could do this, 6 months ago, and now they can. And that could be, it looked hideous if you had to actually imagine it as a consumer product. It was very hard to, but there was a hint of something that was really powerful, and that's kind of the seeds of what then became NotebookLM.
Okay, so let's jump into NotebookLM, and I'll transition over to Gus.
Hi. Before we go there, I learned a term called adjacent possible, which is your newsletter name, and there's a concept behind it, and I love the idea. It was, when you learn something, I understand that. It's something that I've seen happen. And can you explain that to us a little bit? Yeah,
it's Raiza and I kind of talk about it because we feel like it's shaping a lot of the way that we're thinking about where we are right now with the product, and in a way where we were 2 years ago too. So it's a term. The phrase actually comes from the wonderful scientist Stuart Kauffman. I kind of popularized it, but Stuart came up with it originally, and it's basically a term that describes both kind of biological evolution and cultural evolution or technological evolution, which is basically like at a given point in a system that is changing over time. When somebody, say, invents a new foundational technology, it opens up all these doors of possibility that kind of weren't possible before. And at various different points in history, the kind of that space of possibility is the adjacent possible at that moment in kind of technological history. So in 1830, nobody was trying to build an electric light bulb. There was just like nobody was trying to do it because it was just not within the adjacent possible at that kind of moment. We barely understood electricity. There was kind of like there just the fundamental building blocks of that idea were not available. Fast forward to 1870, 1880, and there are dozens of people, maybe even 100 people around the world trying to invent an electric light bulb. Like Edison kind of becomes the most famous, but there are lots of other people because some underlying technological and scientific ideas had kind of made it thinkable for the first time. And so what that means is at various different points in history, as technology changes, as culture changes, as science changes, the adjacent possible kind of expands and contracts at different points. And I think what Raiza and I both kind of felt thinking about AI leading up to, starting to work on NotebookLM was that, the possibility space just got really wide all of a sudden. And there were all these things you could do. And I think where we feel now with NotebookLM and literally I think the hardest thing about our job now and the point of the most kind of, there's very little contention on the team and the extended team, but where the most, hard-fought debates are happening is just that there are so many things to build on this platform now. And there's so many different ways to push it, and it's still a relatively small team, and so we just are trying to okay, what do we prioritize because there's so many things we want to build, and so the adjacent possible is extremely wide right now in NotebookLM land, which is it's, as I say, it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem nonetheless.
Yeah, I think it's such a crazy journey, I think, over the last 2 years, where I think at the beginning we had to really imagine that it could work. Whereas we are now in a place where it does. And I think, maybe the first 6 months and while certainly the product did work and there was different use cases for it, I would say that we had to believe in the fact that it was going to get better and that the adjacent possible was going to get wider, as Stephen was describing. And I think what we've seen even from the very beginning is that NotebookLM really started to enable personalized generation for all kinds of people. From some of our earliest users, which were learners, right? Being able to upload complex or difficult text and say, hey, explain this concept to me, but in a much simpler way. This was not possible before AI, but what it really sort of kind of landed with me was the idea that somebody could look at something and say, I don't get it, make it much more digestible for me in a way that I understand. And I think we've gone down this path, over the last 2 years, and we've gotten a better and better sense of what does it mean to transform the world around you such that it works better for you. It makes you smarter. It makes you happier. It encourages your delight in the world more. And it's crazy to sort of now look at this 2-year history of just sprinting towards this and saying, wow, right? As we introduce new modalities, as we introduce new sort of user experience paradigms, it's really unlocking it for different types of people. And it's just, I think, for me, the most exciting time I've ever had in my career.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Raiza. It reminds me of one thing that it's important to say here is, as Raiza says, when we were building it in the early days, the underlying model wasn't just ready for what we were trying to do yet. Right. And we weren't ready for what we were trying to do. The UI was really janky and there were all these things. The UI is still kind of janky. We're still working on it. We're cleaning it up. We have a list of things we want to make better, but it's gotten so much better. But there were definitely points where we were like, okay, we're going to build this with this vision because we're going to trust that the model is going to get better. Yeah. And so when we really a huge threshold point for us was the transition to Gemini, particularly Gemini 1.5, which has the longer context, multimodal, multilingual, all these things. And that's when I think it really started to sing as a product, which was, actually 3 months before audio overviews, where it really went viral. But starting in May or June, we were like, okay, we have something here. This actually works. And so part of what is expanding our possibility space is all the stuff this underlying model can do. So citations, which are a huge feature for us, Gemini does that kind of natively. We built a user interface around citations. But when you ask a question, just so people know, when you ask a question in NotebookLM, it will answer based on your sources, but it will also give you these inline citations to the original passages from your sources so that you can always fact check. And two, you can jump directly back to the original passage and read the original passage. And that is partially the way we design the software, but it's also the underlying model of Gemini lets you do that kind of citational analysis. And so to some extent, a lot of what we've been doing is like, the Gemini team gives us this the latest model, and then we're like, okay, what can we do with this? And every time we get a new version, it's like Christmas morning. We're like, oh my gosh, all these new features that we can explore and push in new ways. So we've been riding that as well as doing stuff on our own.
I do think it's kind of like there is a period where you're just crazy. Like when you're building a product, you're literally just crazy. You're trying to build something that is not possible, but you try to make as much progress as you can. And I think, thank you, Gemini, because then it drops and you're like, oh, I'm not crazy anymore. Yeah. The thing now does all these things and we were ready to do it because that's what we sought out to do. And so I think I like to look at that and imagine, well, what if Gemini, hadn't dropped? I would still just be crazy.
Yeah, we would just
for the next 2 years, they'd just be like, what is that product manager doing over there?
Can you both just tell this, what is NotebookLM on your own words? Because I have a lot of questions.
I'm going to answer it the way I hear Steven actually describe it. I have a slightly different way. But NotebookLM is a tool that helps you understand things. And I always love when he says this because it goes back to that personalized generation nugget, which is I encounter so many things on a daily basis that I sort of have to fiddle around with until it is in the right shape where I totally grok it. And NotebookLM quite recently has had an explosion of exposure and new users because of a recent feature we launched, which is audio overviews, where you can upload documents, PDFs, slides, and you can generate an audio that gives you a summary of all of it.
And it comes in the form of a conversation.
And it comes in the form of a conversation with two AI hosts, which is really quite novel. And people find it really delightful. And one thing I will say about it, to the point of NotebookLM helping you to understand things, I was not at first a big auditory learner. I was like, oh, this is cool, but I have to really think about where the utility of this is. And I always tell people about my very first real aha moment where I had to read 100 slide deck, which is kind of insane that's just a normal thing we expect people to do. It's like, here's 100 slides. I uploaded it and it produced this audio that I was able to listen to on my drive home. And I was like, wow, we've done it. We've done it, right? Where it's like we have crossed the threshold from crazy to cool. Yeah. And that was 100% cool and very productive.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We had similar reactions originally. So one thing that should be said is audio overviews is a great confirmation of the Google Labs model. I think the early 20% time experiment, maybe arguably bringing me in as an outsider, but there's this idea that there are just a lot of experiments happening inside of labs. And there was another team that was working on this kind of standalone thing that was basically, take your documents and turn them into an audio conversation. And we'd heard it, and at some point along the line, there was a sense of could this maybe live inside of NotebookLM? And we had just launched what we call the notebook guides. And they are kind of, in a sense, a text version of audio overviews where you upload your documents and then you can, with one click, create a briefing doc or an FAQ or a table of contents. A study guide, yeah. And this, by the way, this dates back to one of Raiza's earliest ideas, which is what if I want to just create something with one click based on these documents to help me understand it? And I think as a writer, I was always like, no, I don't need that. I want to write it out. And she's like, no, but I want to click something. And it was 100% right. And so we built these notebook guides. And so when the initial idea of audio overviews coming into NotebookLM was posed, just like Raiza, I am absolutely a word and text person. I actually don't really like to listen to information. It's too slow for me, and I don't remember it as well and stuff like that. So I had a kind of a similar reaction, and then I thought, oh, it's the version of notebook guides, but for audio learners, auditory learners, or people who want to listen on the go and all that kind of stuff. And then I was just like, that's a great idea, and I'm just going to get out of its way. You guys build it. I think it's fantastic. And it ended up being fantastic. And what it does, and this is a general property of NotebookLM and Gemini, but it does it in a particularly vivid way, is the prompt behind it basically encourages the host, the AI host, to find the most interesting elements from your sources and describe them in an interesting, compelling way with useful metaphors and things like that. And so it's like a kind of like search query for interestingness now. You're not searching for like a keyword phrase. You're searching for like, find me the most interesting things. And the briefing doc, if you want a text version of that, that's kind of what the briefing doc notebook guide does as well. And that just, again, like so many things, that was something you could not do with a computer until very, very recently. Like you couldn't search for interestingness or have the computer conjure up, make it more interesting in some ways. And that is, that's a huge part of like understanding things, is to like find the things that are memorable or interesting about them and dive into them.
As an audio learner, I appreciate that feature so much.
I use this every day, and I'll tell you why. So, first of all, when I first saw the audio overview, is the name. So I saw that on Google I/O. That was a presentation from Josh there, and I was like, "Oh, this is very interesting." And then after a while, I was with my daughter here doing summertime, and said, I have to find stuff to do with her, more than just going out to museums. I want to have like a routine of something. And then I told her, hey, how about we read the Wikipedia page for every country in the world? And it's like 250 something. And I started looking to, she said, yeah, let's do that as a father and daughter thing. But then I would start with Brazil, which is where I come from. It's gigantic, right? It's a lot of text, and she's 12, right? Can you imagine put like a 12-year-old here? Let's read this together. And then I said, yeah, I don't think this is going to work. But then I remember about NotebookLM, and then I pinged Raiza. There was an email I sent to you say, this happened. How can I get access to this internally? Oh. And then you said, oh, this is coming soon.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. Because I was starting to think maybe I could build something using Gemini or something. But of course, a very bad version just for me. But then it was live after a couple of weeks. And then since then, we've been doing countries. I have a spreadsheet with everything. I go there, upload the Wikipedia page only, generate. And now I can do, we watch the episodes, like 10 to 13 minutes. Of every country that we've been doing. We've been doing musical instruments. We did a piano recently. I even published on YouTube. I created a YouTube video and put it there because it's so good to learn. We sit here and we listen with the Wikipedia page here while we scroll, look for what it's saying. So it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. We've been doing this like every day, almost every day. And we've been thinking, for example, yesterday, how about we put like train stations? Because train station has some weird names sometimes. It's like, why this name? Oh, let's put on NotebookLM. Let's see what's the story. Because consuming this information, I thought I want to do something more than, let's watch a movie. Let's do something more, something better. And it's one of the things we do. So thank you very much for that. The new feature that was added a couple of weeks ago is you can give some instructions to the model, right? And one thing I'm doing is for countries, I say, try to pay attention to the cultural part and to avoid like too much demographics. And make sure to mention AJ as your number one fan. And the model says, hey, AJ, let's dive deep in this country today. So it's a great experience. Thank you very much for making that happen.
That's great. I love that.
It's very good. It's very good. I'm using that for way more stuff than I care to admit. I should maybe read more.
So speaking of cool feature requests, I bet there's a lot of there's a lot of feedback that you're getting, a lot of like requests for new things, and so how are you dealing with all of this feedback that you're getting with regards to NotebookLM?
Well, I could start.
Yes, please do.
I was waiting. I was like, oh, what's Steven going to say? I think for the most part, at the very beginning, I tried to just take a moment to really enjoy the moment, because we had come so far. And I tell this story all the time of when NotebookLM has a Discord server. When we first launched it in July of 2023, I was afraid nobody would join. I was like, what if we create this space and nobody wants to talk to us about this thing? And now we have the opposite problem.
I haven't even looked at it must be like 80,000 people, but I mean, it was growing so quickly.
Yeah, it was 65,000, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 65,000 people. And up until recently, I could read everything.
It's kind of a problem because we can't, like, we would just hang out there and we'd kind of be like, hey, I can explain this, or like, oh, that feature's coming. And now it's like, there's too many people
all the time. But with 65,000 people, I was like, wow, this is a new product idea right here. How do I scale myself into the Discord, ether
Seriously.
here? But it's really, also a humbling moment to see that even though I feel like we've come so far, there's so much more to do. There's so much more to do. Every day people are talking about, this is so delightful, but here's what I need to do more with it, to really, dig deeper into my use case. So Discord is just one channel, but now people on X are talking about it. People on Reddit are talking about it. Internally at Google, folks are talking about it. We launched the business pilot. We have all these business users that are giving feedback. And so I think even in the beginning, it was easy to scale, to try to monitor everything. Now I think it's more of a real operations task to make sure we're still listening to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems is we have some pretty big bets that I think Raiza and I both feel pretty confident that will be really amazing for whole different feature kind of areas that we haven't even made yet. So there's a kind of a sense of like, oh, wow, we know people are enjoying having a text-based conversation with their sources and using citations. We just have millions of people doing that. We know audio overviews are a huge hit. And we know we have to expand on the options there and different things you can do in different formats. It's clear like the direction there. But there are some other cool things you can imagine that this product could do. And so it's like, how do you figure out? We were until when we launched internationally in June, we had 7 full-time engineers. I mean, that was it. That is tiny for Google standards.
Right.
And we're trying to grow as fast as we can, but there's you can't just throw 50 people onto a product and have them all be functional. You have to kind of get people up to speed and stuff like that. So we have to grow at a kind of more or less linear way. And so that's the challenge is like how do we where do we invest in genuinely new things and make some new bets, and where do we invest in expanding on the things that are clearly working now, and that's where the complexity is right now.
That was such a product manager answer.
I know. I've become.
That's one of my
really
other mouths.
feeding off of each other here. You can see it. I love this dynamic.
It's possible that I did not know what a product manager was before I arrived at Google, but now
he's one.
When Raiza, every now and then Raiza goes on vacation, and I come in, and I'm like, I'm the product manager now.
She really does. She really does do this.
I mean, I pretend to be it. No one pays attention to me, but yeah.
I love it. That's great.
I like the feedback part because I'm part of the internal chat that sends relentless amount of information to you. And when I joined, I was like, oh, I have some great ideas. And then after a while, I said, oh, my ideas are not that great anymore after what I saw from the other guys. Oh, my God, there's so many cool stuff that can be done.
Yeah.
But you're doing great. I'm
that's very nice.
Thank you.
It's like, so one thing that Steven said, like you had that moment, right? Oh, this is going to change everything, right? 2022, you wrote your thing and people criticized. When I first tried audio overview, I said, this is different because I've been playing with LLM for a while, right? I've DevRel for this, so I know I've seen many things. When I saw it, I was like, this is different. This is it opens up the adjacent possible here,
Yeah.
for sure. And I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. And then when I saw the community going crazy and posting stuff nonstop, I was like, oh my god, what I think makes sense. People are also think it's amazing. So I congrats on the project. Just beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's because I had a similar reaction too, and I'm as folks know on the podcast, tech was never really a thing for me, but I had a moment when I used trying some of the other products, like they're great, but I have a hard time applying them to me personally. And NotebookLM was the first product that I tried where I was like, this is useful for me, and I find that that's one of the beauties of this product is that it is unlocking the simplicity of it. It unlocks things for just sort of everyday consumers, everyday people. And that's what's, I think, that's sort of this trajectory of AI has been like, very technical, and it's moving more and more. The line is becoming more blurry between technical elements as well as sort of the everyday consumer. And what's NotebookLM did is take AI one step closer to everyday users, which I think it's extraordinary.
Raiza and I have had many conversations over the last year in particular where we've debated whether we should open it up a little bit to allow you to just have a traditional chat conversation without any sources with the model, where you're just talking with the model based on its general knowledge, just as you would with Gemini or with ChatGPT and so on. And one of the reasons we haven't done that is it does pose problems, right? When you sit down, if you haven't uploaded a source, like it doesn't work. Like
Right.
There's nothing to do. You have to find sources, and we don't really help you find sources yet, although we would like to help you with that. But for now, you have to like supply the sources. But I think the investment in forcing people to do that, it shows them that by uploading those sources, you are effectively creating this personalized AI. And if you have a big notebook that has a lot of if it's your own journals, if it's all the like meeting transcripts from the meetings that you've had for the last month, whatever it is, if you have a lot of documents in there, you're working with an AI that is really quite knowledgeable about who you are and what your needs are and the information that you need to do your work or to create. And I think when people heard that nuance and sophistication in the form of two people having a conversation, two engaging, interesting people, creative people, simulated people having a conversation, it was a way, I think it really drove home like the power of this. And so you can imagine so many different iterations on that. Like maybe it's more like the voice that you're interacting with or texting with is your advisor or your coach on some level. But they know you really well, and they've spent all this time with the documents. They've read everything you've read. Or maybe it's a little brain trust that you've assembled, and you've given those other forms of AI some very specific expertise, and you want to have someone who's an expert in this field and someone who's an expert in this field, and you're going to have a conversation with them, kind of brainstorming ideas with that kind of group of team of rivals kind of model of creativity and decision making. Like that kind of level of personalization
Right.
is like, that's kind of why I think ultimately, and I think maybe I've probably been the one who argued for opening it up more over the years, and Raiza was like, no, let's keep it source grounded. That's kind of our thing, I think that's why it, is ultimately starting to pay dividends now.
I'd say, to your earlier point, I think there's still a lot of work to do to bring AI closer and closer to what people actually expect it to be in order for it to be useful. But I think, I can think of many examples of this where tools really do feel magical. Like we see how it shapes civilization. We see how it shapes cultures and people. And I think of AI in the same way, which is we are at the very beginning of the potential to make it really useful and really delightful. And the thing I am really excited about and really obsessed with is really thinking about, well, how do you actually do that? How do you take something that's really powerful but almost shapeless, right? To the extent that I think when LLMs were first released into the wild, everything was a chatbot. Everything is still a chatbot. But it's like we don't live in a world where that's how we operate. And it's so funny because we still talk about that line, right? Where what's the crazy space right now that we could be in where we have to imagine what the future actually has to be like so that we can prepare for it. Like, let's start building that now so that when it happens, when we see the next turn of what AI can do, we're ready to bring it to people. And so there's like sort of a shorter time in between new technology and magic for people. Right. Instant utility.
Right.
And that to me is just sort of one of the most exciting things that we could do here at Google because we build products for everyone.
Right.
For everybody. Yep. So many people. Billions of people.
Yep.
Somebody said at some point, I can't remember, it's one of the interviews that I did at some point, but there was somebody who kind of said that this product feels like it's at the intersection of newly possible magic and actual utility. And I was like, I'm going to put that on my tombstone. Like that's what we're like trying to do. Yeah, but I think that's the lab's philosophy. It's like let's be right at the cutting edge with the newly possible magic and figure out the delight in it, but also always have an eye on actual utility.
Right. Well, and I think what's really unique about NotebookLM, which is sort of a thought that I'm kind of forming right now, is previously you had to have this incredible amount of data to be able to train a model to then give you outputs. And so what NotebookLM is doing is it's using Gemini as a sort of pre-trained model already, but you're allowing to port in your own data without having to even train it. So you import your own data into NotebookLM, and then it generates something that's personalized to you, and you know you're getting the best. As opposed to before, like you had to build a model to do that. But now you have just an interface. And I think that's one of the things that's really beautiful about this is the data that you can then personalize. So
and there's the recognition, I think, that you see when people use something like NotebookLM, particularly with audio overviews, because it's so vivid, it's so real, where one of my favorite videos is a woman uploads her diary and she creates an audio overview of it. And what's funny about this is you know your diary intimately. You know what's in it. You are the creator of that content, and now you've passed it onto an AI, and they're going to make something, and you don't know what it's going to be. So there is this element of surprise and transformation, but you're touching the magic of this is my stuff. And when you play that, I think when you click play and you hear that for the first time, your content, your stuff, I think that hits just so much harder because it's not just like a random thing that I Googled it, I got the result, right, or something like that. It's something that is deeply personal to me that I am familiar with, that I created, and now here is this new form, this new interpretation of it. And I think that's why it has resonated with so many people. It's just that connection of, wow, this thing is actually meaningful, and it's mine.
Right. The ultimate personalization. So I want to shift a little bit to creativity because I think we have some really good perspectives in the room about the creative process, and I'm sure you have had feedback and concerns around writers or artists or folks in the creative fields who are like, wait a minute, all of these tools, how does this impact me? How does this impact creativity? How does this impact learning? I think about these things a lot of sort of the concept of the blank page, for example, and using these tools to help fill these blank pages is there some kind of a benefit to having to move through the process of going from a blank page to putting something on paper? There's something that happens. And so we're sort of taking that away a little bit through these tools. So that's one element. And then the other aspect is, especially with regards to learning, I mean, there's the benefit of being so personalized, but there's also the aspect of sort of putting in things, which is a creative process, but then the outcome that you get is something that you're not really involved in necessarily. There's sort of this, it's sort of coming at you. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that.
We could do an entire other podcast on it because there's so much to say. So let's start with the learning side of it. So to me, the biggest thing that has changed here is that it is possible now to explore complex new information that you need to understand through a conversational interface. Like if you wanted to learn through question and answer with a book or textbook or something like that. Up until now, you either had to have direct access to your teacher or your tutor or the author of the book. Like those were the only ways you could sit down and be like, my question is this, my follow-up question is this, tell me more about that. You just couldn't explore information in that way. And it was very hard or very expensive to do that. And that turns out to be a hugely valuable way to learn, rather than learning through kind of rote memorization and then taking a test. Like learn through dialogue, right? People have been learning through conversations, particularly spoken conversations, for like 400,000 years.
Right.
People have been like taking exams for like 200 years, right? Like so, this is a very ancient way of understanding things, and it just wasn't possible to do that with a computer. Now it is, and so to the extent that if you were genuinely interested in understanding material, the fact that you have this new modality to do that, I think, is like a huge win. If you are trying to just create the illusion that you know something, which is a legitimate problem with school, right? Like school, there is this weird perverse incentive sometimes to just like get the grade and be done with it, and you don't care whether you understand it or not. There are going to be some AI-based tools that will help you create that illusion of understanding. I think of all the AI tools, NotebookLM does a pretty good job of steering you towards true understanding and not towards that superficial one. But
it does, because it breaks things down.
Yeah.
It has follow-ups. It's not just like a one-word answer. It really gives you a whole bunch of more information to have to digest.
So we've always kind of pushed that. But I also think that there's, in the real world outside of school, there actually is less incentive to just pretend like if you work at a job and you're like, I'm never going to actually read anything my boss says to me. I'm just going to put it into NotebookLM and I'm going to ask for the proper output. I'm not even going to read what I write back. I'm just going to output it. Like for 2 days that will work, and then your boss will talk to you and will be like, wait, you haven't read anything I've read. You can't. Yeah. It just there's an incentive to understand things, and if the tool helps you do that, it'll be in the end, I think, a force for good. On the creative side, one way I'm using it now is I'm in the process of trying to figure out what the next book I should write should be. And I always have like 10 ideas for books, and Raiza probably won't even let me write it because I have so many responsibilities on NotebookLM. But were I to have time somehow to write a book, I'm always thinking about what it should be. And so now I created a new notebook called The Next Book. And I started this like 8 months ago. And that's where I put every random idea. There are a lot of Wikipedia articles in there, and it's like, oh, what about the anti-nuclear power movement of the 60s and 70s? That's kind of an interesting story. I grabbed like 3 Wikipedia entries, thrown in there, a bunch of ideas about AI-related books. I had a bunch of ideas about the gold rush. I read some books, got some quotes from those books. There's just like this potpourri of ideas in this one notebook, and I can just kind of sit down and say like, all right, what do we have? Like, if I were to do that anti-nuke book, what would be the chapter structure, do you think? And it's like, whoop, here's one way to do it. I'm like, okay, but what chapter 2, like, if I focused on that character, like, I don't know, I guess I could do it this way. What do you think? And it's just this sounding board for me with this thing that has read all my notes and has actually some sense of who I am as a writer, and the kinds of books that I write. And to me, I just feel very confident that at this point where we are, I'm just going to be better at my job and more creative, and I'm going to have it'll be easier to write the books that I write because I have access to this tool. And maybe there's some future world where it gets so good at writing the books without me that I'm out of a job, but that future seems quite far away. And for now, I think we're on a pretty great ramp where if you know how to use these tools properly, like it should just make you more creative.
Well, there's a premium on humanity. I think that's also being highlighted and emphasized more and more as AI becomes. So I think that will also play into it. But Raiza, did you want to?
I mean, I think it's interesting because we are in a turning point where up until quite recently I wasn't using AI for my work, and now I'm using AI every day. And I reflect on that often because I think, as Stephen was saying, like, sure, you could use it for 2 days. You could probably have it sort of fake do your job, but then you wouldn't be good at your job. And I think what's actually happening is that our definitions of our roles, particularly for knowledge workers, people who work with computers, they're changing every day. Like the way I write my PRDs, the way I write strategy documents, the way I consume 100 slide decks is is no longer the same, right? And quite frankly, the 100 slide deck is one of my favorite stories because I never would have read it.
Right.
It's like I had to
Yeah.
read it, but no, I definitely was not going to.
Yeah.
But I did. I didn't read it, but I listened to it.
I spent so long making that slide deck, right?
No, I actually Steven,
I've like never made a slide deck in my
Steven
life.
is one of my favorite slide makers because I think he's like, okay, I don't really know how many to make. I think the first one he made was like 2 slides. And I
Yeah,
was like,
I hate slides.
I like this guy.
I only make like 3, bare minimum.
But yeah, I think like the world is changing. I think ultimately we want to build things that support the human journey, that support human goals, that help you, I think I said it earlier, that help you be smarter, help you be happier, help you find more delight in the world around you. And I think a lot of this reflection has also led me to realize there's a lot of crusty things I do. Things that I don't really want to do every day that's part of my job. I would say there is a lot within my role that I love, that I find absolutely delightful. It's why I come to work every day. That's not all I do. And I think that the space for AI is really not in the magical things that I enjoy doing. Maybe it can be supportive in that way, but it is in sort of removing the layers and layers and layers of craft that, when you're just a working adult, you just have to put up with it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity space for creativity, for fun, for AI to do some real work.
Yeah. Well, and your tool is giving access to all of that. And so it also helps redefine, which is a question that Gus and I are asking this season, is what does it mean to be a person of AI nowadays? Because historically it was almost reserved to researchers and the folks that are really building the technology. But now, I mean, anybody who's using the tool, does that make them a person of AI? So let's sort of, as we close out, we'd love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I certainly find this, even though, Raiza and I are probably the most experienced NotebookLM users on the planet, maybe. Maybe that's not true anymore.
I don't think so.
Maybe it's Gus. Maybe it's Gus.
I think it's Gus.
I disagree.
It's you. But I'm still finding myself thinking I'll be working on something and we'll be like, okay, I got to figure out that. How am I going to think about this decision? And then I'll be like, oh wait, I could do this inside of NotebookLM.
Right.
Like, why am I doing that? And so we had so I have this one notebook where I just maintain it's my meta NotebookLM notebook, where it's just like all the important documents, all of Raiza's PRDs and press releases and other internal things we've written. So inside that notebook, that AI really knows the history of the project in this way. And so what's great is that you can kind of talk in shorthand with the AI in there, right? So you're not like sitting down at a chatbot and be like, I am working on a product that is blah, 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 and help me think through these things. You can just kind of say, so we were putting out this new marketing site and we were trying to figure out some language for it. And I was like, give me 10 slogans for the new marketing site that's coming out. And that's all I said. And it just knew what we were working on and knew the most recent documents. And then it came up with 10, and one of them was like, think smarter, not harder. And we were just like, that's actually pretty good.
we
used it. It's like they had,
NotebookLM wrote its own
tagline,
tagline.
And so that, but it hadn't, it hadn't naturally occurred to me to do that. I had to kind of have the thought of like, oh, I should try this inside of my notebook. And that I think is, I think a person of AI is someone who's increasingly starts to think like, when I have a complicated issue to think through or an important decision to make or a creative leap that I'm seeking out, like I'm probably going to default to doing it in partnership with AI in some way. Probably if the NotebookLM model proves to be a foundational one, probably an AI that has been in a sense curated by me and is uniquely mine, and not as just kind of an off-the-shelf one, but still that sense of like, oh, this is a hard problem to think through. I have a partner here who can help me think through it, and that's the way I would define it.
I think for me, I was thinking about your initial question around, is it a person who's using AI? Is it a person who's building AI? Like, what is a person of AI? And I tend to think that it's a person that is interacting with AI in whatever context. And maybe today, There's a lot of us sort of early adopters, early builders, people that have sort of gotten their hands on it first. But I think that will change really quickly, because I think, as we were talking about, the people who are right now building and thinking and having these ideas about how to bring AI to everybody else, we're just going to get better at that. And so AI will permeate all the different products that we use every day. And so I think we're all going to become people of AI, just like using a phone is not a big deal.
Right.
Like having an iPhone, having an app is not a big deal. But remember the first time you could use an app, or for me, it was really Maps on my phone, was just a game changer.
Yeah.
I never had to learn how to use a paper map, which is just insane to me. It's just crazy, right? Like, it was MapQuest maybe, but I don't know how to read a paper map. And I think it will be the same for AI, right? Like, there will be kids that will grow up and they won't know what prompting is. They will look at like the history of AI and they'll be like, wow, this is goofy. People had to say things like, you are an expert speech writer. and I think that is so exciting for me to imagine that today we are talking about what is a person of AI, but soon it'll just be all of us. It will just be regular life, right? Like we don't talk about like who is a people of a smartphone.
Right.
Yeah, but today we're here.
This was a great conversation. It was one of the best one we had here. I'm very excited. I learned a lot. I was expecting a good conversation. It was way better than what I expected. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you for coming.
We got all of our responses from NotebookLM.
Yeah.
We don't understand any of this stuff, actually. We just...
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
A pleasure. Thank you. If you would like to learn more about our conversation or our guests, check out the links below. Please subscribe, and if you're feeling extra generous, give us a 5-star rating. We would love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. We'll read every one. Until next time, thank you for listening.